asking. That's what I did. None of my business. I'm sure you have. I'm muted. Okay, I mean, I think Corey.
I think it was gonna start.
Thanks. That was furthest back.
6:14.
Right when you work, Steve. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Call this June board meeting to order. Let's stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, everyone. Thank you. All right. Everybody's hopefully looked at the agenda by now. I need a motion for approval. Tonight's agenda. I do want to make a comment. I'm going to be adding another item in executive session. I'm talking through the item, so.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Red, safety minute.
So safety minute, I don't know if you guys saw our Facebook post. There's been a lot of work around the utility industry as a whole, as far as, there's been some legislative done. Not only is it legal to tamper with your meters, it's extremely dangerous. There's been multiple accidents across the US. So this is just a reminder not to encourage or tamper with meters. Like I said, there's high voltage on the backside of these things. And it's a felony to attempt to steal power. So just a reminder to everyone. Yeah, it's not for timing. A cool moment, I got two. So one, I'd like to thank the committee, and I'll acknowledge them by name once we get all the communication together to do that. But I would like to say this is one of the best, probably the best annual meeting we have had. I'll be quite honest, from my seat, it didn't even feel like election time as far as just the planning and everything that was done, really without the need of me at all, and even a lot of my staff. So it went really flawless. There was a committee that was, made up of different department folks, and they really took this one head on. And I think talking to people afterwards, looking at the survey results, our numbers are going up. The voting didn't go up, but everything as far as participation went really high. We did buy a gift for the folks that were obviously helping out, and you guys are included on that. So before you leave, there's a gift back here. So you can pick that up. But again, just want to congratulate everybody that was involved. You guys had a part in that. Again, I think it was one of the best we've had as far as participation. There was an increase in, people showing up, and I just thought we heard a lot of good things. So, and again, on the election process, the SMB process works really well. I think we got that honed out. We didn't have a lot of members asking about on-site voting. We publicized that through every meeting we had months early. And I think all that work paid off. So thanks to everybody that helped, and thanks for the committee that did all the planning. Second, there's a NISC, who is our software provider, put together a member advisory committee. And this is actually a committee of about 14. And it's basically they want feedback from members and users of NISC. And so they actually held an election, believe it or not. And so they had committee members, and then basically large utilities, broadband members, and then just like folks that make up this committee. And so What was interesting about it is Crystal wanted to put in for it, and so she filled out her thing and it was voted on. So she was against the 3 or 4 people, which I don't think Crystal really knew it was going to be voted upon. Well, she won. So I'd like to congratulate her. She is our first member on the NISC Member Advisory Committee. So I thought that was another really cool moment to share. Second thing, or third thing, it's not on here that we heard today. We got a letter today from a member that, or not a letter, it was basically a phone call, thanking the crews and the response to an outage that we had. I don't know if it was last night's outage, but it was Bernie Fire Department. And they were just thanking us for picking up the phones, being polite, and essentially responding to an outage very quickly. I can't remember if it was last night or not, but we got the phone call today. So I thought that was, it's not every day you get praises. So
Good deal. And the committee that Crystal is on, that's a national, is that national?
it's a national, yep. Yep. And again, the committee is made up of electric users only, broadband users, and then large utilities, because NISC doesn't just serve co-ops, they serve gas companies, munis, IOUs, just broadband people, and then both. So it's a pretty big organization. I thought that was really neat that if we have a concern with where we're going with our software needs, we have a person on the committee. So
Sure.
pretty cool.
All right, thanks, Brad. Well, for your information, do you have any questions, comments, concerns?
I do. My first one is for Matthew.
Yeah.
There's a check that was written, number 303143 to legal. The first item that's listed there is a pretty big one. Is that the totality of that incident regarding that issue? Is there more to come, or is that a cleanup?
Which one is it?
Archie.
What page? Way off.
I know that was a big one. I just want to know if that's all of it.
I approve these. Do you mind me?
No, whoever.
He can look it up specifically, so.
Sure, that's not everything.
No, that is not everything. You mean for the first line item on there? Yeah, that's not everything. I think what was budgeted was just over 12, so it's not far off. It's a majority of it.
But the legal's going to be way over for the year then.
Yeah, but that'll be in hometowns, so that will not, everything that we spend.
reverse that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that 8 on top.
Yeah.
There was 12 totals. There's still more to come through on that, but that will not go to our financials. No, hometown picks that up. Good question.
On the American Express page, first page, IT supplies, there's an amount there. Is that really supplies? Got the first page.
Yeah, I believe those are. That was not something I know off the top of my head.
It's not,
Get out, Dale.
not critical, just seems like an awful lot for supplies unless it's an awful lot of months worth of supplies.
So
We completed all that server integration, so we'll find out. The key indicators, you guys were asking a couple months on the number, and it was pulling from a wrong cell. So we got that fixed now. I will reattach that back in here. We didn't get it
I
all.
was gonna say something now. It's,
Yeah, so we'll get it reattached out there and it's fixed from now on. That number was incorrect.
It was pulling 1 month instead of year
you questioned it, I think.
I think Jason did 2 months ago and then I,
Yeah, it had the average,
to date. It was pulling from the current month, not the year to date. That's why that was number off. That's a healthy spreadsheet. It pulls like from 30 different things for each line. Your safety committee report, you talked about a logo for a truck. So that made me think about we like done, like everything's coming without touchstone.
no, so anything new will not have, so our logo work is done. So we've got all the logo artwork, so anything that's new will not have that on there. So
We don't have to modify anything previous.
that's a loaded question.
I thought we were supposed to.
You are, although we did submit when we did all the paperwork for that, we were phasing it out. So there is a small risk there. Most everyone's doing that. The cost to rework everything is just a lot. So anything new will have the new logo.
Anyone have any additional questions for your information? Good to go on? All right, we'll go to the next item then. Includes the May board meeting and the special board meeting. I think we can do it in one motion too. At least we can. Any changes are needed.
so moved.
Second. We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, the same.
Dale, that was new employees.
Docking station.
All the loggers. That computer has to be a specialized computer because it's running mapping.
I mean, it seems like a decent amount of money, but in that world, that's a short life.
He had.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so on the next item, it's our first meeting after the annual meeting, so it's the time of year to elect the chairman, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, and assistant secretary and treasurer. And I know the secretary and the treasurer can be the same director. So we'll start out with chairman. Any nominations?
Steve Amrine.
Make the motion leave as is,
For,
whatever, same thing as it was. If you guys are good with that, I can't do that. Okay, sorry, Brian.
yes,
Second, Steve.
So you have a motion.
we'll follow through with that, I guess. There, any others?
Need a motion to close the nominations.
I think we needed that
Make
motion.
a motion, we close the nominations for chairman.
Okay. Second? Wait a second.
Second.
Okay. All right, so thank you. We'll go to the next one.
You're gonna want to do something with this motion. You want him to rescind it. He didn't make a motion.
Oh, okay, Carl. Okay, can you resend the,
Oh, yeah, I said that, yeah, okay.
all right, so let's go to the vice chairman. We have a motion for vice chairman.
Who is the vice president?
Dale Copley is.
Dale. Dale,
You making a motion?
that's my nomination.
Okay,
Following Carl's lead.
I'll second.
we have a first and a second. Are there any others or somebody want to close the nomination?
Sure, close the nomination.
Okay. Aye.
I'm not, I down the list.
Oh, did you? Okay. Okay, so nominations are closed. Dale, you're vice chair. All right, now we're down to secretary. Are you secretary and treasurer? So if everybody's good with combining secretary and treasurer, we'll do that one collectively.
Are there any volunteers?
You were here. You were the next guy next week. It's between you two.
We know.
Why? Because you're the two that's gonna make the decision.
All right, that one, Joe.
Take that time.
Who you?
Between you two down there, you two decide.
Steve Nobby for the secretary.
I said that.
I spoke.
I missed that. Jason, did you make a motion?
Yeah, I nominated Steve Nobby to be the combined secretary / treasurer.
And Suzanne seconded that.
First and second, are you good with that, Steve?
Brian doesn't want to do it. Yes.
We'll help along the way. Let's, somebody make a motion to close, please.
Motion closed.
Second. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Steve. And then we have assistant secretary and treasurer. Jason, you're currently in that role.
Yeah.
Are you willing to
It's
continue?
very demanding.
Okay.
Is he willing to continue?
He says he is, but
I was gonna actually see if Brian wanted.
open for nominations.
Brian contemplating.
We'll leave that one as it is. Retiring completely.
I think I need, let's get a motion for,
I'll make a motion for Jason.
okay. Second. We have first and a second. Nominations,
I'll make a nomination to close.
okay. Thank you, Jason. So I think we have that task accomplished. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Yeah. You can go sign this stuff.
We gotta move already.
Oh, yeah, you gotta start taking notes.
Steve,
You'll be the one that gets to sign my paper. We're got an appetite. We're making some red lines right now, just clean up red lines to bylaws. You guys have an appetite to change these?
Change what, Brett?
Put the secretary and treasurer together because when these were low, was a treasury job. Now they're not. Do you want to put them together?
We did that years ago.
well, we stated in the policy or bylaws, it says they can be the same, but they're still separate entities.
It's up to you. I just thought if we're doing cleanup, you don't want. This is,
You know, maybe you can put it on next month's agenda, to where we can get that clean.
Look, he's like, I'm not writing down one thing. I'm not writing.
Freedom.
It's just a template.
Hey, Steve, if you mess something up, we have video recording, so we can go back. It's okay.
You'll have to go back on the.
I can.
All right, the next item on the agenda is a CEO update, Brad.
Yep, so I just want to go over a few things. So if you go to your dashboard and update your dashboard, there is an updated org chart. It's got pictures and everything on there. So we have filled this has been a lot of my time just onboarding and getting stuff set up, but we now have our staking tech is actually been at training for the last couple of week or so. He is on board, participating.
It still has Cat Nobby on it.
I did too.
Yeah, I must have the old one still.
Dashboard.
Jason, right here.
Did you update it?
I updated it.
So if you go to dashboard and then you hit the update, it doesn't.
It updated. That's what it updated again too.
Does everybody else have?
Mine's
Does that Cat Nobby?
Mine's not.
Mine's not. I hit the update.
Are you on dashboard?
Still trying to do. Still trying.
That's interesting. I have no idea why yours wouldn't.
Yeah, mine is correct as well.
Mine is.
So major changes, like I said, or I'll look at yours, Suzanne, afterwards. I don't know why that's not doing that. So we got our staking engineer on site, going through a lot of training. We do have a mentorship program. He'll be traveling to Henry and Jackson to oversee kind of how they do things. Second all, we have our operation manager, Johnny is on, been here for a little over a week, so going through training and stuff with him. And then, as you already know, Jeff Hall has transitioned into the old office of the operation manager and is actively in his role. So things are.
Well, yeah.
So the other thing I was going to talk about is we do have a new pole attachment agreement. So when we talk about somebody that wants to attach to our poles, Matt led this up. We have a very extensive, I think 27, 28 page. It has been vetted by legal. It has been vetted by many co-ops that use it. It has a process for illegal contacts. It has a process for how you attach. It has a formula for coming up with what the rental fee would be. I feel like it's a really, really good. This is one area that I think we should congratulate ourselves, and we don't do it often enough, that we are getting our contracts in shape to where they have some teeth and they have some true value compared to some of the older ones that the industry always just use as far as from a template. So this is one we completed. It took a ton of work.
Check back.
Yeah. So anyway, done project, something that really wasn't a scheduled project, something we really, really needed to do. So it's complete. If you are wanting to look at it, you can. It's pretty.
Legalese.
It's a riveting read, isn't it?
I bet it's a riveting read.
It is written in legalese. You have to read it about 10 times.
I probably read it 20. The second thing, and I'd like to go over this maybe a little bit more in executive session, but this has taken a ton of my time, and it's Comcast pole attachments. I think it's probably more appropriate for me to brief you on that in executive session, but please remind me because I think it's important to keep you guys in the loop of what's going on there.
Okay.
And then the last thing is our joint venture definitive agreement. So the idea right now is my team, fiber team has sort of, and again, this is a very extensive legal document. We have been through it. We've made our initial comments. We've sent it back to legal. First time they've seen it. So they went through it already, provided comments. We actually have a meeting tomorrow afternoon from 2 to 4 to answer some high level questions, get those answered and ready to go. So it's ready for us to hand over to SCI for them to comment and start the negotiations. My plan was to get it to a point where SCI is comfortable, we're comfortable, and then ultimately you guys are gonna have to approve that to allow me to execute the contract, because it's a joint venture contract, so you'll have to eventually approve it. I just didn't want to get you involved in all the changes because it's a red line mess when you go back and forth between three different companies. So that's where I'm at on it right now. Our tentative goal is by July 9th that we will have it over to SCI. And so my plan right now is to try to have it to you guys. I don't think we need to get it approved, although to talk about it, start commenting on anything in the August board. So.
Okay.
I know you weren't going to be here for July, and then we need the time anyway. And so August right now is our tentative date to bring the definitive agreement for the JV to you guys. Any other questions on any projects or any updates that I didn't hit that you would like to know? I did attach the projects and kind of updates and stuff like that. Everything else is moving on. Like I said, the major things going on right now is to get our new employees up and going, get them trained properly. It's a really good test to the time that we spent a year or two ago revamping our onboarding process, making sure that I'm a big believer if you're asking somebody to do a job, the job must be clear in the job descriptions. I feel like those are updated and look really, really good. And so just making sure that now we get the people, the tools they need to be successful at their job. That's our number one priority. And then the second thing is these pull attachments. And then third thing, obviously, the joint venture agreement. So those are the major things going on right now. Any other questions?
I got a little question. Mike sent those pictures about that drooping line like that.
Yep.
You have a phone number I can call?
That's a good question. They stopped by there and I don't know that anyone knows whose that is at this point. It's probably Great Plains is what we're thinking.
I think it's Great Plains. It has to be Great Plains.
Yeah. Let me take an attempt to call them. We're gonna have a hard time getting anything done on it, I'll be honest.
Well, yeah, I obviously on that.
They're just,
It's pretty daggone low.
yep. Yeah. Let me see if I can't figure something out on it. I'll take an action item on that.
As a landlord, give me a phone number, I can say, hey,
I can give you the number. I don't know whether it'll,
text it to me.
yep.
I've had run around before.
Yeah, it's not gonna hurt.
Need to have a conversation, follow-up conversation with you, Brett, regarding some down around my area too that I mentioned to you previously. And get a little bit more in depth with that.
Yeah, the next option honestly is we send you have to send a demand letter referring to the contract saying you're out of code compliance. You have 30 days, whatever the contract says. I think
You'd have to know who to send it to, right? But
yeah, it's another problem sometimes. But if we spend the time to go back and look, we should be able to find it if they got approval. I'll put that on there. I'll follow up with you too.
and I'll follow up with this sidebar.
Yeah, it could be part of that. Good.
Yeah, you good?
Yep. All right, I'm gonna move to the metrics. So May's median temperature obviously was warm, so it was 5 degrees warmer than our 5-year average. You'll see that in the financials. Wholesale purchase energy was up about 8.3 above our 5-year average. And then if you look at our HDD and HCCD, or CCD, which is cooling degree days, was up as it was expected, and our HDD was way down. Basically means an increase in power, up about 8.3, and our demand was up just about almost 1%. So fairly good month as far as sales above what we had budgeted. So we went from 1.4 to roughly 1.9 the month. If you look at the KWH retail sales, you can say residential's probably, well, it's not the biggest, but that's the biggest jump. You go from -4.8. So we went from 2 months being under budget to 844 in May, which obviously made up some of that. Then you have commercial, which has been strong all year to budget. Industrials is really being drugged down by one. And then yeah, it's all one basically. And then you have transmission, quite a bit again. They've only had one month that's under budget. So that's the majority of where we ended for May. And again, if you look at last month compared to this month, we went from 1.1 to 1.8. So we made up a big difference. And obviously, I think this streak's going to probably continue for this month. Not a bad place to be. I'm going to move on to our liability. Really had no major outages. Everything's been pretty calm. You do see a couple spikes there. Those are really due. The name of this year has been farming and vehicle accidents. Those have been the majority of our spikes that you see here. Not much you can do with that other than try to respond and get things up as quickly as possible. If you look at lost consumer hours, obviously down quite a bit. We were at 4727 compared to our 5-year average of just under 6,000. And if you look at the number of outages, we're 42 compared to 58 for 5-year average. And like I said, the outage causes for this month, which has been pretty much the story all year, is vehicles and machinery. So accidents and farming equipment. And then trees not in the right of way. So 9 times out of 10, the trees out of the right of way are these ash trees where they're way off our right of way. They're falling down. Steve had one on Sunday where it came across, snagged the line, broke the pole. That continues to be. We do have in our contracts to identify and make safe is what we call it, basically. Dead ash trees, but of course they're dying quicker than seeing.
Most of the dead.
Some of these are all
60 or 70 foot tall.
Yeah.
Fred, on the lost consumer hours, what's the yeoman's part of that 4,700? What I see on the chart is minimal.
Say that one more time.
The lost consumer hours for the month of May,
Yep.
I see 4727.
Yep.
But the detail above is all small numbers. What makes up most of that 4727?
So you're asking what outages made up?
Category.
Oh, it's definitely vehicles, machinery, and trees not right away. Is that what you're asking? By far. If I took this bar graph right here and turned it into by cause, you probably wouldn't see anything else with those two. Which typically and that's been the ongoing story for the whole year. And again, we try to market, we try to put out, warnings and things to be careful of lines. Dead ash trees, we're probably got in our future for a little while yet.
In 5 or 10 years.
That wouldn't surprise me. Some of them are just dead trees in general, not even necessarily ash. Questions on any of the metrics? If you did notice one other one I should have put in here and I didn't. For line loss, if you saw there was a weird blip from last month to this month. So what that was is we blew a fuse and we couldn't figure out exactly what it was on our AMI system. Could have been an animal. It happened twice. Pretty close together, and our system was down for a little while, trying to recoup from that. And so we didn't get a bunch of billing readings in time. And so there was actually 1 month was short 2 days and the other month was heavy 2 days. So we always get the reads because the meters keep all the reads, but based upon billing time, sometimes you have to shift days. It happened last year. It happens about once a year where you don't have all the reads. This one was specifically due to an outage on our AMI system. And then there was also a software change that was made at NISC. So that's why you see that blip in there. It all has to do with is how we build. There was I think it's actually 1 or 2 days, I can't remember which one, that was out of one month and into another month. So it's gonna be light on, it screws up your denominator. So that, we dug into that because I saw it and I'm like, that looks odd. And that's really all it was just shifting KWH from one month to the next. It wasn't like our line loss was really that bad. It's just you change your denominator. Numerator. Any other metrics, questions, projects, or anything from my standpoint?
Everybody good? All right, yeah, we'll go to the next item. Matt, update.
All right, biggest things this month on the balance sheet is our net utility plant was up about 476,000. That's due to the bucket truck mostly and the right-of-way machine. That's where the bulk of that is. That's really the only thing that rises to the 5%, 250,000 on the balance sheet. Any questions on the balance sheet? Next is the income statement. Statement of operations. Biggest things here, revenue is running higher than budget, as are power costs. The revenue is running a little bit ahead of the power costs, so we're running a higher gross margin. We're at about year to date, we're 196,000 ahead of what was budgeted. Controllable expenses are under 365. That's due to the right of way being under budget in the maintenance expense line. And then we're under budget across the board in labor because we've had the openings we've had. Then the only other thing is the extraordinary item, which I talked about the other month. That's the bad debt that's changing accounting. So any questions on the margins?
You expect the right of way to get caught up?
Hope so. I mean, they are behind. I mean, there's that's I know Johnny was going to talk to him, I think, in the next week or two. So
They'll either pick it up on time or they get fined.
yeah, we collected a pretty good chunk of money from them last year. So
We did escalate it because we do feel like Matt's right. We feel like they should be farther than they are on the B2.
and we did collect a fair amount of fines on that. So cash flow are relatively the same, decrease in cash of about 50,000. So we will be on pace when we do our capital credits. We'll probably need to borrow some money, whether that's short term or long term. That will be coming.
Especially since now we're kind of mismatched with Hoosier. So we won't get Hoosier till the end of the year, right?
Correct.
Well, and ours is significantly higher than theirs too.
Yep. Doesn't help, yeah.
Any questions on the income statement or the cash flow? Try to definitely make it much more in depth next month since it's 6 months. I always feel like after year end, 6 months is the next most important one to have much stuff as you can.
But he'll have even better numbers for us next month with the heat.
On some things.
Good. Good. You good, Matt?
I'm good if you guys are.
Everybody else good? All right. All right, so we'll go into, Brett's gonna do kind of a review for most of us. Maybe this is new for a couple of us, but he's gonna go over the cost of service.
So,
Kind of retraining, if
Yep.
you will.
you good? You ready? All right. So 4.8 is our, policy 4.8 is our energy rate design. So that is really your guys's. So if you disagree or want to go a different direction than what I'm presenting today, 4.8 is the place to do it, right? So 4.8 is your delegation of power to tell me what I need to do from a rate standpoint. So I thought it would be good to start from there and go over some of those high level things that will drive our cost of service study moving forward. So the number one thing is that we allocate cost across rate classes in an equitable manner, right? You're never going to be perfect when you do a cost of service study. You're going to have rate classes that are different, right? Based upon, risk, things like that. It'll never be perfect. But the idea is that the board is always moving towards that, right? Hoosier does a really good job of, you may not impact one class of members all in 1 year, but you continuously move to equalize. And I'll show you what that means here in a minute. So that's like number one. Number two is to reduce the subsidies between classes. So it's kind of the same thing, goes hand in hand, right? So we got to be equitable. We've got to try to reduce subsidies. Every time we do a cost of service study and any type of rate change, we're always trying to make those small incremental moves to what would be perfect. And then the last thing I would say is that we have to have rates that generate adequate margin to meet our annual lending requirements, long-term financial objectives, and probably the most important thing, our equity management plan. So you guys set out an equity management plan. So if changes need to be made to that, then I would suggest now till November is the time to really get the board to discuss on those, because that's the document we're using to guide where our rate design goes, right? And so these are inputs that whoever we decide to go with on rates and cost of service study, these are the inputs that we're giving them, is what you guys have in an equity management plan and kind of how you want to do rates, whether you want to be, is fair and equitable the right way to go? Is reducing subsidies the right way to go? I'm assuming it is, but 4.8 is the place to go. So I would suggest that the board in the next 3 or 4 months really reviews 4.8, really reviews the equity management plan, and make sure that that's the guidance you're giving me to give guidance to who we're going to work with on the cost of service study. Ultimately, you're making the decisions on the rates and things like that based upon those recommendations, but they all generate from these plans. So if you want to make changes or you don't agree the way that we do things today, that's the place to do it. So I'm going to go from there to, I'm going to go through these slides, and my intention is to go through these pretty high level. Honestly, I'm reusing slide decks from a previous consultants. A lot of words on here. These wouldn't be what my presentation would look like, but I thought at this point right now, it's really good to understand the philosophies, understand some of these terms. And then I want to go over the timeline. So today we're going to go over these high level things just to really get acclimated, especially Steve, since this will be his first one, with some of the terminology and just an overall understanding of what this cost of service study thing means. And then I would suggest probably next month or even in August, you guys will have to start thinking through who you want us to go bid out to. And I would suggest we do 3. We'll go present them with a statement of work and get them to bid on our cost of service study that we'll want to do next year based upon Hoosier's work in November. So then the idea is we'll have bids ready to go by November. It'd be nice in November if you made a decision who to go with. We'll know what needs to be put in the budget. And then January, February timeframe of next year, we'll actually dig into like an in-depth like cost of service study training, where the expert comes in and actually goes through these concepts in very details and answers questions and stuff like that. Once that training's done, we'll kick it off. We'll get them the information they need. They'll work on that with the idea by probably, I'd say, end of Q3, beginning of Q4, be ready to make any changes that we would want to make, so that in April of 26, we'll be ready to implement. It's hard for me to tell, do we need to be revenue neutral or do we need a rate increase based upon today? Because we're talking 26. So we'll get to that when we get there. So anyway, starting off, I thought again, what do we give them and what do we need to do? So that I went through the process as far as your guys' timeline, what I think it looks like. The first thing that kicks it off, once you decide, because the board, that's a board decision, who we go with to do the cost of service study. Once we decide that, what they're going to ask us for is guidance on things like equity management, is there tier requirements, stuff like that, right? So that's why I say those things are important, that you all work those things out prior to that. I think we just did it not that long ago, but it's a good time to review that. Then what we do is we give them those guidances and we hand over trial balances, which are basically whatever test year we decide we want to do. It's basically handing over financial documentation from our system that, breaks down our expenses during the test year and our balance sheet for that test year. So that's the information that they'll use. And then they'll ask for a bunch of sales numbers and, things that we basically generate reports from. So that's what we will hand over to them to kick it off. So, that's kind of the beginning of the process. And so high level, and then I'll get into the slides, and specifically, Steve, for you, high level, what a cost of service study does is it takes, so let's start on the rate base. So what we call rate base is essentially your balance sheet, right? So what capital investments you have in the system, right, from our balance sheet. So in other words, all of the poles, wires, everything that we depreciate, all that stuff gets allocated based upon certain aspects of that class's load. So I'm just going to say, for instance, residential. So we know what the residential load looks like, right, from user, all the data that we have. He will base his allocation of what assets we have based on that load, right? So what this isn't is we go out and count every residential transformer and we allocate that to that residential group, right? You take all transformers cost and you allocate that overall cost based upon the loads. And there's specific NARUC type requirements on how you do it, right? None of this is made up. All these cost of service consultants and experts follow the national government, and I forget the actual name, but it's essentially about a 100-page document that gives you guidance on how to do allocations. So they're following that because if you were to get sued, they will be going to court for us. That's why we have
The cost allocation manual. If anybody likes it, I can get that.
Say that one more time.
The electric utility cost allocation manual. It's a very large PDF. If anybody'd like to see it.
So the first thing you do,
185 pages.
you go through, you take all your assets and you basically allocate them based upon their load and some of that information on how you do that's in here. That's going to give you what we call rate base. That is your investment in that class. It's all done by classes, right? So residential is going to get a certain section of that rate base based upon their load. That's your investment. The next thing you got to figure out is how much margin are you getting from that group, right? So then what he does is he goes through, and I'll show you again, all of our expenses, and he classifies these things into different groups, ultimately getting to, okay, residential, here's the costs that go to residential. Shared stuff goes to like customer charge, energy stuff is easily identifiable by all those. It's pretty easy to allocate those, but essentially you're going to take all the expenses, I'm just going to use residentials, right? And then all the operating revenues for our books. So you have our revenues, you have our expenses, you subtract the two, that's your margin, right? Then you take the margin and you divide it by the overall investment, and it basically gives you a percentage, right? So it says this is your return on your investment, essentially. You do that for every single class, and it's going to give you a system return on rate base is the actual name for it. So the entire, let's just say I'm going to make up numbers here. The entire system's rate base, so again, that's operating margin divided by the overall assets, the investment, is 5%. Any class, every class will contribute to that 5%. Everyone that is right at, so ideally you want every single class at 5%, and then it totals up the system, the overall system is 5%, right? That's a absolute perfect picture. It'll never be like that. It never will because costs change all the time, right? But that would be a perfect picture of no subsidies whatsoever. Everybody's equal. There are risk decisions that you'll have to make as a board as far as should they all be equal? I would argue that your industrials and some of your bigger ones, are riskier. If one of those falls off, it's way riskier to our rate base and our membership than it is if 200 homes fall off, right? 200 homes out of all of our residentials probably won't make a big deal of difference as opposed to maybe one. So there's some risk analysis that you really have to think through and understand. We're going to pull a bigger rate of return from those. You would expect a bigger rate of return from those. In other words, we're pulling in more margin to cover their investment than maybe, for instance, a residential, just because it's the risk that's involved. But in general, that's all you're doing is you're taking, here's the investment, here's the margin, you divide the two and it says, here's the percentage. And then you do that for the entire system. And we'll go over that a little bit more detail. Clear as day, right? All right. So when we do the rate making and what's going to be, what we're asking our consultant to do and we'll send them a statement of work. And basically what we'll ask them to do is, and these are the steps that you go through, right? And he'll probably break these into a couple different forms and he'll come in and say, okay, let's go over these parts and he'll present out on these things. The first one is to determine the revenue requirement, and I'll go through what that means in a minute. So you're trying to figure out what revenues do we need, right? What's the overall requirement for revenue? What you're going to do is you're going to say, here's what we actually are bringing in. Here's what we need to bring in. If those two are equal, you don't need a rate increase. You're just going to do some switching around. If there's what they call a revenue requirement deficiency, then that's when you need to start talking about a rate increase. So that's the first thing. The second thing is what they call a revenue reconciliation. So this is actually a really neat process because it tells you a lot about your rates, it tells you a lot about how we bill and how we collect on those bills. And so essentially what he does is he's going to take all of our sales numbers, he's going to look at all of our tariffs, and he's going to do the math and say, basically, you should have had X amount of revenue coming in based upon your sales. And he just reconciles that. And so and then he actually compares that to what he calls the proofs. So the actual numbers in our books. So it's basically saying, did you collect what your rates tell you should collect based upon the number that sales that you set out? That's essentially what it is. So it's a revenue reconciliation. Again, it's a proof to make sure that your revenues are coming in that you would expect from your rates. Then they perform the cost of service study, which we'll go over in great detail. And then based upon that, you're going to get recommendations on, well, based upon the revenue requirement and that study, he's going to give you recommendations on what some of you have been through this a couple of times now, but he'll give you recommendations on the many options that you'll have to make a decision on what we want to do with rates overall. So that's overall a high level process. So revenue requirement, it's essentially your O&M expenses. So your expenses plus a return on investment capital. There's a couple different ways you can do that. In general, we've been using a ROR, a cost of capital type number. Then you take the depreciation and taxes, you add all that together, and it basically says, so basically the cost of doing business plus some type of return, agreed upon return, that gives you what your revenue requirement is. You may ask what are operation and maintenance expenses. It's purchase power, it's our operations, it's our maintenance, customer accounts, basically all of our budgeting items plus our purchase powers. One thing we'll do too is you're going to do a cost of service study and say, this is what it is today. And he's going to present those numbers to you. But next year it's going to be different, especially based upon whatever Hoosier does with their rates, right? So then what you're going to do is what they call pro forma. You can only do pro forma according to the guidelines that it's got to be known and measurable. We can't say, we hope to buy this truck. I don't know a good example, but we hope to do something. So we're going to go ahead and raise that up. It has to be something that's known and measurable. Something like, hey, we had a cost of service study in the test year and we know we're not doing it in the next 2 years. So we're going to take that out. Or it could be something where we didn't have it this year and we know it's going to be in there. So it's got to be known and measurable. Another good example is power costs, right? So if they end up doing where our rates would go up or down, you would pro forma those. So in other words, you take the actuals and you would make them into what you would expect them to be for the next year. So the return on, so part of the revenue requirement is, again, all your expenses, your depreciation, your taxes, and then what we would call a return on your invested capital. So what that means is margin, essentially, right? So how do you come up with what margin is fair and equitable? And so there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. We've been doing return on rate base and essentially the cost of capital or the cost of our members' money. But there's many different ways of doing that. They all get you to pretty darn close point. So this is an example. You got all your budgetary items up there. You got whatever we agree upon is the return on investment. You got your depreciation, property taxes, and it gives you a revenue requirement at the end. this is a lot of words of saying, here's what I calculate they should be and here's what they actually are. You subtract the two and find out, are we short or not, right? So revenue reconciliation, again, that's basically saying, I'm going to calculate what we should have got back in revenue. And then we're going to look at what the actuals were and we're going to prove them together. They're never going to match exactly correct, right? There's too many variables in there. They're looking for a percentage difference of less than 1%. And I always hear that if it's over 1%, you've got some type of issues, right? Your rates are wrong, or you're not collecting based upon your rate. Something's goofy, right? I can tell you in general, every one of the ones I've ever looked at here they're they're not even close to 1%. And again, this helps identify any type of, the reason the cost of service study person's doing this isn't necessarily to say you received what your rates say. They're looking at it because they're basing all this data, right, on that number. So they're reconciling to make sure that that's a good number to use. So that's why he's doing it. They're just identifying any problems in the data that they receive. Or this is just how you would do it. So he just basically calculates, here's the customer months, here's the KWH, here's what's on your tariffs, here's the fuel adjustment, here's what the total is, here's the revenues per books, and here's the difference. By the way, this one is not ours. This would be an ugly. You would not want that much difference. So now we're going to get into sort of the meat of a cost of service study. And there's a bunch in here again, just try to get the terminology down more than anything. So KWH versus KW, and I'm not going to read that out to you. The way I always look at it is KW is demand, right? So it's how big of a pipe does someone need, right? And then KWH is how much water is going through that pipe in a given certain time. So over a month, over a day, over a year. Again, how big of a pipe do they need? And then in our case, how much infrastructure do they need to be able to serve their peak? And then KWH is just how much energy they use over a given time. So one is a given time, one is like right now peak, and the other one is just over time. That's the main differences. Load factor, you're going to hear me talk about load factor all the time. Load factor is the best way I can say this is if Jason has a semi and he's hauling gas and Steve has a semi and he's hauling gas, they both got the same type of semi, right? And he's hauling, sometimes he gets a half load, sometimes it's 3/4 of a load. His load factor is a lot poorer than if Steve's, every time he's taking a gas, it's filled to the very top of that thing, right? That's what load factor is. The higher your load factor is, the better off you are. I always say like a farming load. Farming load is one of the worst load factors you can have because you're using a ton of energy, which requires a ton of infrastructure, and you're only using it a couple times a month. Whereas an industry may be running 3 times, they may be running a perfect load factor would mean you're using every bit of your capacity every time it's on. So that's the difference. And load factor directly relates to the cost to serve a member. It costs more to serve a grain bin than it does a factory. It's just the matter of the infrastructure and how much KWH, and it really just comes down to math. Coincidence factor, again, these both load factor and coincidence factor have a lot to do with the cost it takes to serve that member. It costs more to serve different types of usage members. Coincidence factor just means how coincident are they to your peak? If you're someone that uses off our peak, it's a heck of a lot easier or cheaper to serve them than it would be if they are on our peak, right? Again, if you're someone that uses a ton of energy when we're not on a peak month, then it's a lot cheaper than if you were to use in July, right? So there's basically 3 steps when I say allocation. So this comes down to how they allocate those expenses that we talked about and how they allocate the rate base that we talked about. There's different allocation methods to do that. And there's really 3-step process. He's going to call it functional assignment, classification, and allocation. I'll tell you what that means here in a minute. So you assign all the utilities costs into these major groups, which I've already talked about. This maximizes the effectiveness of the study for detailed pricing, such as unbilling rates. So what this basically this jargon means is we got to make sure that whoever causes a cost pays for that cost, right? And the more unbundled you get, the fairer it gets. So if you have one rate, like I would argue our residential rate is not an unbundled rate. It's really a bundled rate. So it does allow some subsidies within the class because it's all baked into one. And I'll go into details on that a little bit. So you take all your costs and you basically put them into these categories, and don't worry about other. They're never anything that hardly gives into other. It's either a generation cost, a transmission cost, or a distribution. The top two come directly from the Hoosier bill and the Hoosier load. The third one comes from all of our costs that's not related to Hoosier. So that's the first thing they're going to do is take every single cost and they're going to categorize it into one of these three, four, but usually it's those three. So again, energy costs, these just talk about all the different demand costs and how they're essentially allocated. The next one is, then they take all those costs and they break them down, right? So our generation cost from Hoosier is broken down into demand and energy. The transmission cost from Hoosier is broken down. That's all demand, essentially, right? And then they take distribution costs and it's broken down into demand and customer. So there are no, that's why we have the $37 fee, right? And there is no Hoosier cost into those. Those are fixed costs that basically go into our customer charge. So examples of energy costs from our GMT, it's fuel, it's scrubbers, it's all the variable cost stuff that's in there. Distribution cooperative, KWH, it's a portion of purchase power cost. So essentially what that means is whatever our KWH cost from Hoosier is, typically you would add on an adder on that to cover some of the distribution cooperative costs. So then when we talk about demand, so again, demand is the size of the pipe. It really, or in the peaks, there's two terms, coincident peak and non-coincident peak. So coincident peak means when Hoosier peaks, what is our load? So we peak different than Hoosier and we peak different than MISO. And all of our substations are measured against this. So what a coincident peak is when Hoosier peaks, what is your demand, right? You get billed upon that number. The other thing you get billed upon is what they call non-coincident peak. That is just our maximum peak. And these two numbers, they're close, but they never are on the same hour, right? They're always a little different. And so remember, when Hoosier did their cost, or they did their last rate change, they changed it from Hoosier's peak to MISO peak. So now everything aligns with whatever MISO is, because that's the market essentially. This just kind of shows you, so if this is our peak, right, that's our non-coincidental peak is what we call our distribution peak. That's at the top. It won't align with what our utilities peak is, which now it doesn't really matter what Hoosier's peak is. What matters is this MISO's peak, because that's what we get billed against. So this is MISO's peak. This is our peak. This is just a graph showing you they won't align. Customer related charges. So we always get asked, what's the $37 for, Brett? What's the $37 for, Brett? Distribution costs are irrelevant to the size or usage of customer. So these are costs that it doesn't matter how much KWH, if you sell 0 KWH, this place still has cost. We got to recover that cost. The fairest way to do it is through a customer charge, because if not, if you bake it into the KWH and it doesn't matter how many KWH, the folks that are high users are going to pay way, way more, and the people that are low users are going to pay not their fair share. So the way to do it is to what they call unbundle it and make it a part of your customer charge. Things that each customer needs one of, regardless of the customer size or usage. And there's a way to identify what is the minimum. So it does have poles and wires in it, but it's this minimum needed wire to be able to carry electrons essentially. And it's the proportion of the distribution costs that vary with the size allocated to distribution demand costs. So essentially it's any cost, that $37 is any cost that it doesn't matter how many KWH you're selling to that customer, you still have these costs. And then it's what we call a minimum system. So every member has what we consider a minimum system. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're serving 18 grain bins or one little small trailer. There's a minimum, and there's a way to calculate that per the requirements on how you come up with what that is. And he'll show you, he'll say, When he gets done, he'll do this calculation and say, here's what your customer charge should be, and here's what you're actually charging, and then you can make it, I think we were like $1 and some
Like
change.
$38 and some odd cents.
Yeah, it's like 38.
Very, very close.
So we never moved it last time. That thing, when I talk about that minimum thing, it includes meters, installation, service drops, meter reading expenses, billing expenses, and then that minimum system that I talked about, right? So make sure that if someone asks you and you answer this question, it's not only the cost of things like accounting and billing and stuff like that. It also includes this minimum system. And the reason that is because everyone has to have, it's like a grid access. Everyone has to have this much. Now, depending on how bigger you are, the rate classes are going to pick up that extra incremental cost. So then the last step is to take all those costs and allocate them over to whatever classes you have, right? So we have a residential, which is single phase, and then we have all of our 3 phases and 3 different commercials. We have an industrial, and then we have a couple other tariffs out there. So that's how it goes down. Again, you take all your costs, you break them down here, you take those costs, you break them down in here, you take those costs, you break them down in here. That's essentially how you do everything to allocate costs. And again, the whole idea of this is how much does it cost to serve that rate class? That's what you're trying to figure out. That's basically what I said. Energy related costs are allocated based on, this just goes through some of the detail, honestly, that we'll go to in the next one, but it just talks about how things are allocated specifically based upon, when I say based upon load, how do you do that? That's what these are calling out. I'm not going to go through all those because they get really confusing. This is not ours. This is what one would look like, right? So essentially you have a return on rate base down here for the entire system. And all it's doing is it's saying, here's our operation. This is our margin. At the end of the day, here's the money that we make in our test year. Here's the investments that we have in total. You divide those two and it gives you, here's what the system return on rate base is. You're going to go through that same exercise for every single rate tariff you have. And then basically what it's going to do, if I can get, ain't the right one. And then basically what you're going to do is you're going to go through all of them and do the exact same thing. And you're going to see any number that's higher than this 3.77, which is the system, right? They're paying more. And anyone that's less than this, they're paying less, if that makes sense. Again, ideally, 3.77 would be, all those would be 3.77. That would be perfect. It will never be perfect, right? Just the costs move around too much. But you can see, for instance, there are some in here that, like this 21, I don't know, who this would be in an instance, but it may be because that's a very risky class, right? So it's okay to have someone paying more than what the system is because, again, it was based on the fact that they have more risk. But those are the questions you guys have to be answering, and the questions you have to be able to justify is, how do we make sure that we get all these fair? And again, the name of the game normally isn't just pull off the Band-Aid and get these all to zero, right? It's small incremental changes so you don't impact your members over. It's just trying to move always to the correct spot. Return on rate base, I've already kind of talked about this and how you would come up with essentially how much margin do you want? So in your rate revenue requirement, how much is enough margin to add into that? There's some calculations down here. We'll get into that when we get there. But essentially, we've been using the weighted cost of members' money, essentially. So there's a couple, this is just talking about, there's a couple different ways to calculate it. We do have a member who we have no cost to allocate to, or the cost is so small compared to the revenue that it's a negative, right? So the number doesn't make sense. It can't make sense because you're essentially dividing by zero. And so for that one, there's a different mechanism that you can say it's return on revenue, right? So you're going to look at what their rate base is and the revenue that they're generating. And you do that for everyone again, and it comes up with a number. We will have to do that for one of our customers because essentially you have margin, yet very little to no cost in it. This is what I kind of talked about. Parent rate of return for rate classes to, again, that's what I was talking about. Our goal is to reduce and eliminate subsidies between classes. That's the biggest thing, right? You'll, unless you go to a completely unbundled 4-part rate for every single class, you will always have subsidies within classes because rates are built on averages.
Elaborate on 4-part rate.
Four-part rate would be a coincident, so you're measuring demand in 3 different ways, right? So how close are they to our peak? What is their peak? So that's 2 demands. You got an energy charge and a customer charge. That's a 4-part. And we don't have any 4-part rates. That's that's the best way to eliminate the, you're still gonna have some, but that's the best way to eliminate subsidies within class. So you go from a 4-part rate, which is very, very complicated, takes a lot of metering. Fairest probably way of doing it, members won't understand it necessarily, to a worst case scenario, which is we're just gonna charge per kWh. Per kWh is not enough to necessarily, and we don't do that, right? We have a customer charge and an energy charge. So the worst case scenario, which would create the most subsidies within a class, is just, we're gonna take all of our costs and we're gonna put it in a kWh. And the reason that's a bad idea is because you create so much variation between each member based upon their load. In other words, you're over collecting or under collecting based upon their kWh, which isn't fair.
The 4-part rate. This is a question, it's going to sound like a statement, but this is a question. The 2 big barriers to the 4-part rate are there's an increased metering cost that we would have to incur.
Yes.
And there's an educational piece. While you're giving the consumer the ability to control their own destiny, there's an educational piece that becomes very difficult to help them understand how they would do that.
Absolutely. If you want my opinion, eventually you will have state and federal laws probably pushing us more in that direction. And the reason is today, the only way to get somebody, if all you have is a kWh charge on a member, the only way they're going to be able to reduce their bill is to reduce their kWh. But we know in here that the best bang for your buck from an industry in whole is to reduce your usage on peak. You can use off peak. We don't need to build more power plants, right? And so there's more bang for your buck if you can get people off peak. So that is why we do have, or that is why there's an ability to do, and we do it on commercial loads, which is seasonal rates, right? You're trying to send a message that we don't want you to use in the high summers and you're going to pay more because it costs more. Did I answer your question?
Cost of the last kWh is the most expensive.
If we had a 4-part rate, could we in theory do away with classes then? Because you'd be able to monitor, you wouldn't really need classes.
No, you always have to have classes. And the reason you have to have classes is there's still a huge usage. There's a difference in the usage profiles are so different that you would still have to build, a rate based upon those demands. And those demands are different based upon their usage. I don't know a better way of saying it than the demand for residential is not the same cost as the demand because of how we allocate everything.
It would be,
Completely different.
that meter would be able to meter that out under.
The meter will be
4-part rater would
out.
be able to see, because you said there's 2 different demand parts and a 4-part rate.
But the
Well, that
cost
has-
the cost it takes to get a kWh at peak to Carl on one of his farms from Hoosier is going to cost me way more than a KW at Jason's home, right? So you have to have rates based upon allocated costs, no matter, we can meter it all, absolutely. I can tell you exactly his demand, both coincident, non-coincident. I can tell you his coincident, non-coincident, but the cost differences between the two is why you have to have different rates, if that makes sense. There's no way ever to get,
Classes because of certain.
because of the cost of service study. And we know that if I go back to that one slide, this may make it right. All these costs that are coming across here are different depending on what class you fall into. The metering package, we can meter exactly the same for all these members. And it'll tell us exactly what they are. But the cost difference based upon how they allocate all this cost is completely different. So you would never be able to go to a one stop shop.
Transmission cost of serving a manufacturer greater than the transmission costs of serving a.
If you wanted to be completely fair and equitable and follow cost causation, you would have, how many members do we have? 6,800 four-part rates. That's what you would have. And real-time pricing is essentially what you're signaling. That's unmanageable. You can't do.
Someday they'll have that with AI and everything else.
Yeah, I would suggest someday.
50 years from now, that's probably how it'll
We
be.
talked about that with commercial. Small business, like the fairest way would be take those 90 or whatever they were at the time and each of them have their own rate. It's not practical.
That will happen someday though, I think. I think in 50 years, everybody will have their own rate.
Well, then you start talking about FERC 222 and the fact that, which is never mind, I'm not going to talk about it.
We haven't the ability yet.
Cost recovery, the goal is to recover the fixed and variable costs as fairly as possible from both large and small use customers. So again, if it's a variable cost, you want to reflect it in a variable charge. If it's a fixed cost, and I'll give you, KWH is a great variable cost, right? It depends on how much you use. Whereas a fixed cost like the billing or the accounting department, that's going to be by customer. So you divide it. So if there's 15 customers, whatever the accounting is, you're going to divide it by 15 and they're all going to pay that in their service charge. I think is what we call
It's billing, it costs the same amount of money as in the bill to
it. Then
every customer.
yeah. So rate design principles, recover fixed costs through, I just said that, recover variable costs through variable charges. Intra-class subsidies are avoided if these principles are followed. This is huge, right? So the better you get at allocating your cost and keeping true to it costs me 10 cents per kWh and we're going to charge 10 cents as opposed to we're going to put some of it in demand. The more truer that you can get everything and the better you recover those costs, whether it's variable or fixed, will reduce your subsidies. And that's the goal, right? In class and between classes. This is just a continuation, fixed cost recovered through KWH charge, drift over time. I just said that. Stranded cost, when we talk about having a fixed cost charge, it's important because of this. Major problem with traditional two-part rate design arises when fixed distribution costs are arise when members decide to self-generate. So what they're trying to say there is if you put a bunch of our distribution margin in a KWH, so you're going to recover our fixed cost. So accounting, we're going to recover what it costs to run the accounting department through a KWH. And a member produces their own KWH, you're not collecting those costs that they should be recovering, right? Just because they have solar doesn't mean we don't have to pay our accounting people. That's why it can create a stranded cost and why it's important to get your service charge right. But members, we talked about that. These unrecovered fixed distribution costs are ultimately borne by members who do not own. Again, this goes back to the whole idea of if you don't get your fixed cost, your customer cost right, and I'll be quite honest.
And demand charges could impact that as well. If you have demand on your residential rate, if somebody solar quits producing and all their stuff kicks on, well, they still pay their share of that.
Yep. Back to this though. So again, it's critical to get all those charges into that fixed cost because again, they're not created by a variable charge like KWH or demand. Benefits of cost-based rates. Cost-based rates reflect a functional assignment, classification, allocation from the cost of service study. So you're not making these up. The board doesn't come up with, hey, we want this charge to be this, right? It's from the cost of service study. Cost-based rates minimize cross subsidies. Deviating from cost-based rates result in cost of subsidies. If you do this, you'll get sued, right? If you deviate from, we're going to come up with our own way of doing this. Benefits of cost-based rates, again, reduce revenue and margin volatility for the utility by, if you have good rates, it reduces all the margin volatility that could arise, right? And it reduces the customer bill volatility. So not only does it affect our margin, it affects the member ultimately too. Creates the right, like I said, I honestly think eventually we will be told you have to answer for a state or federal law. You have to offer a rate that's more than just a KWH, the service charge. Most everybody has service charges now. The other thing I was going to say about the customer charge, and everyone's moving to this because it's the right thing to do to make sure that you have what yours needs to be. And I won't take credit for this because it was done way prior to me, but Decatur has done a great job of keeping that. We went to $37 when everybody else was $10 to $14. And now everyone's at $50 to $60. And it's, the members aren't getting it, right? So we moved to where we were supposed to be. We were only $1 off, dollar and some change off. But that's because the board, Steve was on there, I guess, and the old regime said, we're going to follow these principles as hard as it may be. And I honestly think from a financial standpoint and from a member's bill standpoint, it has paid dividends to do that. Because I see all the ones that are doing it now. I'm sure you've heard of some of them too, that have raised their customer bill to $54, $56. Fair thing to do. It's what you should have done a long time ago, right? But they're hearing about it now. We've gradually gotten ours to where we're close to where it should be. And again, if fixed costs are being recovered through energy charge, the utility has no incentive to pursue energy efficiencies, blah, blah, blah. Again, just talking about cost-based rates. Customer service charge, it talks about energy charge. I'm not going to hit all these. These are different rate components that you were asking about earlier. So there's an energy charge, that's a charge per kWh. There's different ways you could do that. You can do on peak, off peak. You can do flat rates. There are different ways you can do that. There's demand charge, so it's a per kWh. You can do it by CP, NCP, or one of the two. You can do it by average demand. We do have some ratchet demand charges. Those are only on the industries. Basically, it's saying you're going to have a certain demand charge to cover recouping our cost. Just because you're off for 3 weeks in a month doesn't mean that we still have to recover a certain amount. That's all calculated at the cost of service study. And there's a ratcheting demand in there. So basically, if you draw it down past a certain COVID, this was a problem, right? Because a lot of people got hit on their ratchets and we were getting questions about it. And we had to go back and explain why that was. It's because we weren't collecting enough to recover what we needed to recover. And then you got the power cost adjustment, one of my favorites. So really what a power cost adjustment is doing is it's saying, here's what we recover in our rate base, right? So whatever our rate base is, so if it's 10 cents per kWh and $15 per kW, that's what we're recovering that's what we need to recover based upon our cost of service study model. If fuel goes high or, there was times in COVID where coal went from, 100 to 200% increases, right? And we weren't recovering those costs through our base rates. That's what this whole thing does, is it just tries to true up to make sure that we're not over collecting, we're not under collecting. We're basically truing it up and we're doing it on a rolling average. I believe ours is complicated, but it doesn't allow us to make any margin off of the things that we really shouldn't be making margin off of, right? Which is our power bill. We're not charging above and beyond what our power bill is. We true that up every month on a rolling average.
But this is why we're doing this whole thing.
Absolutely. That's
The
another
tractor's gotten too high because these variable costs have gone up so much. A lot of that needs to be put in base rates. That's why we're having this whole conversation.
And that's typical, right? Normally what you have, and most of the times, at least that I've been here, is you have these costs that start coming up. And then at a certain point, you're like, okay, are these really variable anymore? I mean, is gas really gonna go down to the ceiling again or down to the floor again? No, right? So some of those you have to end up putting back in the base or you want to, so you charging appropriately, right? Because there's some demand and energy mixed into that tracker. And so they'll put those up in an appropriate place, zero out the tracker, and then you move on past there. That is what's
It's
starting.
drift is what it is.
It's, yeah,
Over time, as things change, you have to center yourself.
But it's been exacerbated by the inflation.
Yes.
yes.
Yes, the drift is much worse when inflation's running hog wild.
So we've already talked about facility charges. There are minimum bills. Those are all calculated at the time of cost of service study. If you want them to do that, again, a minimum bill is just saying, we have to collect a certain amount of money in order to recoup our cost to serve you because we have poles and wires that are up there. Just because you're not taking any KWH doesn't mean we don't need to recover any costs. That's why you do a minimum bill. Back to your question, on a two-part design, this just kind of shows what that looks like. Plan on going through every one of these, honestly. There's your 4-part. And I got that right.
You left out the seasonal part though,
Can't do that too.
because
Flat energy rate, that's, you know, option, I guess. Pros and cons of 4-part rates. I think we've talked through pretty much all these. The cons, again, you can have seasonals, ups and downs. Load factor, we've already talked about. Essentially, there's a formula there if you really want it, but it basically just means how much energy are they using, what their capacity that's sitting there on the lot is. In other words, if you got somebody that has a 1,500 kVA and they're not using half of that capacity, the load factor. This just shows, and we ran into, if you guys remember years ago, we were arguing over some of this math right here, but I think this is impactful because what it shows is load factor will affect your cost based upon it costs more to serve you, not because this is the car thing, right? So you got a semi, right? So there's a cost to run a semi. There's a cost to run a minivan. There's a cost to run a EV. I average all three of these. Let's just say the average is 20 cents. Well, we know it's not 20 cents to run a semi, right? So you got to be careful, like looking at the different ones, but this just shows the load factor. So the lower the load factor, so this would be like a farmer, it's more expensive based upon the math. Whereas someone that's got a load factor of 100, which you'll hardly ever see, it's cheaper to serve them just based on the math. That's just another example showing it a different way. I think this is kind of important. So when folks always ask us, how do I improve load factors? You know, need rate options to provide economic incentives. Again, you got to send the right price signals, right? There's equipment that takes advantage of the rate options and makes it convenient for the customers to move the peak, avoid CP. So again, how you use, if you're a business that can change that. You know, we did hear of it wasn't a business in our area, but they ran, actually, no, across the street, they did it too. Plating operation's a great one, right? So I have a 3-shift operation and a plating machine takes a ton of energy. I only need to run that plater for one shift. If I have 3 shifts to pick from, am I going to pick the shift that's on peak? Or am I going to shift it to the shift that's not on peak? Right? You're going to put it off peak. You're going to save yourself some money.
This is good. Will we be offering a time of use, do you think, in this new one for EV charging?
I think we should look at it, yes.
That would be where we would,
Yes, I agree. Like a supercharge rate. Yeah. I think eventually we're going to have that. I don't know that we need to get it done this year other than maybe see what it is. I also think that maybe even, we talked about doing it last time when we ended up stopping work, but even seeing if we want to do like a 4-part, put some of you guys on it.
yeah, we talked about having the board and the employees, some of us being guinea pigs to see how it actually.
We won't actually charge you what the bill is, but that
But
would
at least then we can
metering
see.
out there to see what it has.
Yeah. yeah, get the metering so that we can get the data to see what it actually does. And
This just talks about special contracts and the fact that you will have members that don't fit into any of the groups occasionally, and therefore you need to really look at how you serve that load, the cost to serve that load, and you'd create a special contract.
Are we gonna have to do that this time?
No.
Considering what's happened?
No. I mean, we have one of these, right?
Yeah, but I'm not talking about that one.
Remind me about that because I have an update. Line extension policy, one of my favorites, which we need to talk about that sometime too. This just goes into why you need a line extension. So marginal costs exceed marginal revenues. Rates are averages and they're recovered carrying costs associated with the average plant. So the thing here is when you build rates, you're building it upon an average cost essentially. And so in order to keep everybody average, you have to have new members that require significant infrastructure build. You gotta make those people average, right? So if Jason's building a brand new house and I gotta build 2 miles of line to get to him, he ain't average, right? He's above average because the investment it took was well over what would have been in an average cost of service study for one member, right? So he is an average. We got to make him average, and that's why you do a line extension, so you don't create subsidies. So we got to pay him down. He's got to pay his way into getting to average. He's going to get some credits, right? Because there is an average. So we're going to give him credits to be an average, but we got to get him from, the cost being way up here down average. That's the whole reason of having a line extension. Again, that creates rate stability. If you never charge a line extension, what happens? Your rates, your rate stability is gone, right? You're putting always upward pressure on rates because someone's paying those costs. If Jason's not average and it costs me $100,000 to build his house, he ain't average. We're never going to collect that on him. Somebody's paying that, so it's going to put upward pressure on your rates. So having a good line extension policy is important. Kind of saying the same thing. So that's the stuff that I was going to go through. That probably is just the tip of the iceberg. I learned today, did you know the biggest part of an iceberg is underwater? I didn't know.
And now you know.
Now I know.
Obviously, you weren't on the Titanic.
Well, they said, well, what do you know about an iceberg? And I said, they're cold. I wasn't wrong, was I? I was supposed to be looking at a picture that obviously showed the biggest part of the iceberg is on the water. But any questions on cost of service study?
Cost of service study, but I do want to back up to Matthew for just a minute. You had a $500,000 RO, I believe, schedule that said for June. If margins are ahead and you expect June to also be ahead, it's possible that you won't draw that much.
We're gonna need to draw money in July. I mean, if we're not gonna borrow it on long term, we'll pull what we have to on the line of credit, but I mean, that's when the capital credits are out, we're not gonna have enough money to come in that month. That's just, are we catching up?
But it could be lower than what we had planned. That was needed.
Yes.
That was needed.
But that, as the Brett says, that goes back though to our equity. Do we want to have a policy where we borrow the least amount as possible, or do we want to have a policy where we're going to borrow X percentage each year? And that's for you guys to decide.
You guys need to look at that again, because whenever we question when we're borrowing and stuff, basically what you're telling us is you disagree with that. We'll do whatever you guys want us to do. Essentially, borrowing comes down to is who do you want to pay? Do you want to spread it across future members, or do you want everybody to pay now?
But if you're just accessing money on the short term and you're going to pay that back, then why does that
Are
matter?
we doing that? I think we have plans, not just short term this year.
I mean, we
Said short term.
but I mean, it's always been in the budget that the board will approve any long-term borrowing. So I mean, I don't pull the trigger on any long-term borrowing unless you guys tell me to. That's kind of how,
But according to this is why the equity plan needs to be looked at, because right now, the equity plan is telling me we need to go borrow long-term. Like a lot.
50% of the
I
plan.
was gonna say, did we send that?
We're not even close to 10%. And we haven't pulled any.
no, we haven't pulled any long-term money yet.
I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying that's what the plan tells me to go do.
Well, I mean, that discussion is different than I need cash, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
access a short-term lending.
Absolutely it is.
That's a different.
I just-
Those are two different discussions, yes. But they relate to each other.
Well, I mean, I would assume that we wouldn't access as much short-term money if markets were running ahead.
Yes,
But especially knowing the future with vibrant and everything.
yes.
And
And
minimize everything we possibly can.
I have,
There'll be plenty of opportunity.
yes, there'll be plenty of opportunities to borrow money, I think, over the next few years. I am, plus I think there is a potential that, I mean, interest rates are high and low enough now that they can go either way, and I don't really have a strong feeling either way. So, and it's that, when it was 1%, I felt pretty strongly that it really
Sure.
couldn't hardly lose, but now I don't know.
Well,
It'll probably go higher and lower. I mean, that's
We will get to our equity plan based upon
fiber,
fiber.
more than likely.
Any other questions regarding presentations? Brett just went over. And then we can review, I think you recommended we review this policy a little closer in the, so it's the future.
Coming months, yeah.
Yeah, so.
And one thing we do need to consider is do we want to start to look at a demand and a seasonal for residential? Because I do think Brett is right. Eventually, the government is going to force that, because the only way you're going to get there's no way to throttle the energy usage on peak unless you have the charges to throttle that. And we're going to have a generational issue, not necessarily with Hoosier, but in the MISO footprint, more than likely, from what they say and all their stuff. There will be some potential generational shortfalls over the next 5 years. I've been told that for years. And the way that they're gonna, and this is my opinion, the way that they will help to lower the odds of that being a problem is they'll throttle it with the money. I mean, at the end of the day, but money moves the world in that regard. I mean, if they start charging triple what they are now for the highest demands, well, then people are it's gonna have to be reflected.
All right, we'll go on to the annual policy reviews. I hope everybody is taking the time just to reread them. I don't think I need to do that in front of you, but those typically come in play again after we do, however, have the one-page document that you could read here at the end of the meeting this evening, signed. So there's nothing that's been redlined unless anybody has any recommendations for any changes of these three policies. I'm not sure we need to talk about them in any great length. Everybody good with them? See a lot of head nodding. I think everybody's good with. Yeah, so as I said, don't forget to turn this in before you leave. Brett, you're gonna fill us in on a couple of the annual meetings.
Absolutely. So thank you all again for participating. So this was a awesome meeting. And if you look at the overall numbers, we had 457 registrations. We had a ton of bingo cards. That bingo thing is, I know it was kind of a pain for you guys to sign those, but it does get people moving around and it gets them to be interactive.
I think it's great.
Little crew club, we had 38. If you look at the results of what they said here, and then you look at the results that came back from survey and ballot, you guys will see all that in one big presentation when we get closer to next year's annual meeting. Ask. Upwards of 80 to almost 90% of our members love the meeting and love our voting process. So you know, I just want to make sure the board is aware of the majority of the members are very satisfied to satisfied with both. Yes, it costs money. It does. But to do both of those two things, I think we have nailed it. You always do hear about, I think the only couple negatives that we got is one, you know, you do it on a Friday. Well, okay, if we do it on a Saturday, there's gonna be people too. You know, the whole idea was, as we said, we wanted to be very, very consistent. If you look at some of the suggestions, you know, some of the themes were, the internet was talked about a lot. People wanting more gifts was talked about. But it is interesting because you hear things like
Need more napkins.
Napkins and wet.
You need more napkins.
Is the predominant one that I.
back to Chick-fil-A. I mean, you hear that, right? It's like, what? More napkins, we're definitely, we will have more napkins next year.
Wax.
Will promise you. So anyways, I thought it was really good. I did attach metrics around the actual annual meeting that we do track, which is quorum and how they voted. So we did drop in quorum, which did I think it was going to be close to 5-6%? No. But you had one less director that was up. That probably made an impact. And honestly, there wasn't any campaigning and things. I mean, there wasn't a lot of attention drawn to it. I don't like the drop, honestly. I'd rather us keep increasing that to 100% eventually, but we did market the exact same way. We did everything pretty much the exact same way we've done. So, yeah.
Right on the vote totals, I was surprised that paper is still 2-1 over the web or smart hub. Has that been typical?
Yeah.
I mean, we're still, paper is the traditional way that we receive 2-1?
It is, but it is, I mean, if you look at our smart hub and web, it went up 0.4%. And I don't know, maybe you guys talk about that too. I mean, what I will tell you is the people that voted online and the surveys that we got from survey and ballots. In other words, when you vote online, it popped up a survey. Overwhelming. I mean, it was like 99% of the people loved that process and said it was so easy, to the point where maybe we even publicized some of those comments. And I don't know of how you would incentivize or not. I can tell you, if you want to drop cost out of this thing from survey and ballot standpoint, get people to quit using mail. Get people to move to the online. It's better. It's easier. It takes you literally all the information's right there in the spot. I get it. Can you get rid of mail? No. But how do you incentivize or get people to move? More online is the route we got to go, in my opinion. And I can tell you there are, I think Henry County, there are a couple co-ops that only do it online.
Yeah, but when you have 69%, you can't even mentally think about doing that.
Correct, but how do you incentivize to get people there?
How do you begin that migration?
Now gradually.
But just be thankful they're voting.
Yeah.
I think you'll eventually get there with time
Next
anyway.
generation.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at the age ranges, I wonder what those are.
Yeah.
People that vote online, that age
Demographics.
Yes, well, it's a mathematical certainty over time.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I don't know really how much cost you're really gonna take. I mean, it's probably not a huge number anyway, but yeah, you can't obviously get rid of it. I would suggest that at least those in the room here and as employees would try to, you know, definitely put a word in for people to do that. I mean, you're saving the co-op.
Yeah, because we have to pay the postage on everyone that comes
Absolutely.
back, so.
So anyways, I thought really good results. I don't, you know, are there some things that we can switch? Sure. We'll give your guys, I mean, I would jot them down or whatever, send me an email or whatever, if you've got some things that you thought may, there's always improvements, right? It's never gonna be perfect. As far as not having any opportunities. Any questions?
All right, thanks. So we'll go into old business and kind of a fiber update. Brad.
Oh, yeah, okay, so a couple things we want to talk about fiber in open, and then we're going to move to executive afterwards and go over some more stuff in fiber. So I want to start with the storage building, and then I'm going to kick it over to Matt. So if you guys remember, if we go back, and I don't remember if it was a year ago or whatever, but we talked about the building. We put some money in the budget for the building. My recommendation to you guys at the time, and that's what we did, was to put a hold on that because the team spent some time with trying to figure out how would we accommodate that building with fiber, but there's just so many unknowns and variables and things like that we just didn't feel like it was a great time to do the building. So we recommended to you guys said, yes, we're good with that. We put a hold on it. Part of those original plans were to build I call it a drive.
The ideas, yeah.
But one of the ideas was we were going to put a big more, we were essentially going to tear down the old building, rebuild the old building, but before that, we were going to put in a huge Morton building kind of out back in that lot. Number one, because we need the space. Number two, we would move over there during the demolition. Knowing we're going into fiber and the lead times to get this thing done, now we're reevaluating, does it make sense to go ahead? Because I'll be quite honest, my position really hasn't changed on the back building. I think until we further along on the fiber build and figure out exactly how much we're going to do, how much, I just think and I know it's cheaper to do now than it would be in a year or so, but my opinion is move forward with a demolish and a rebuild of the back building at this time until we finalize the details on what we're doing with the overall fiber, project, what the JV looks like, what the Manning's going to look like, how much storage we're going to need. I think we really ought to keep that on hold, but as a stopgap, Matt's going to go into, which is possibly we go ahead and move forward with this Morton building, which again, doesn't need to be air conditioning and all that stuff.
So one of the things when I went to the CFC conference, I went to, one of the breakout sessions I went to was broadband one. And the speakers at that highly recommended that you keep your materials purchasing and your materials in-house. So I came back, well, if we're going to keep our stuff in-house, it makes sense to have it here. So I started to, from what I have gathered, when we got an area back there that's not used. We currently have enough stuff sitting outside right now from the electrical business that we can fill half of it the way it is. If we're going to get something, fiber's going to kick off in 6 months more than likely.
Yep.
And if we're going to have some place to put that stuff, we either need to rent a spot, which we probably have to do no matter what, or B, have a spot on site where we can put it. And currently we don't have anywhere on site where we can put it. So I guess my question was, what is everyone's appetite to building just a metal frame building with metal sides, have electric in it, and a concrete floor? No insulation, no
Big doors.
just some big doors, make sure it has door sides to keep stuff out and that we can use for the fiber business as well as half of it maybe for the electrical side. It's a way to store things on site here that we don't have currently. I mean, we can use the space no matter what. I mean, there's enough stuff parked out back that we could fill this building tomorrow. So.
And again, we would use it. So if we do a back building demolition at some point in time.
It'd get used for that too. But even when that's done, you'd still,
Absolutely.
I mean, we can use the space, I guess is kind of my view of it is there are tons of things that could be brought inside right now that aren't. I mean, we could put all the transformers inside. It's not like it'll sit empty is I guess my thought process there. Plus it'd give us a spot to go with the fiber stuff because we did get the grants for fiber and we're going to have that stuff stored somewhere. Even when it's done, we're going to have material for that because it's not the same stuff as the electrical business.
My question, are the electrical and the fiber and stuff like that, is it weather sensitive to where it would deteriorate
Some stuff is,
quickly?
some stuff is.
But transformers are out on poles.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't have to be stored inside, but anything like that you put inside, it's just going to last longer. It's no different than, I always figure it's no different than if you put your tractors and tillage equipment outside, if you stored it inside, it's going to last longer.
Different part of your car garage.
Yeah. It's the same general principle.
except for when it becomes used, it's gonna be outside 24/7 anyway.
Yes,
Where a car's not gonna be outside
Yeah.
24/7, so there's really not a huge necessity to have transformers inside. I mean, that wouldn't be really a
Most of
justification.
them, no, yeah.
That wouldn't be really justification. I guess I'm still
I
a
would-
broadband decision. Because we may need a bigger, I'm not saying yes or no, but the size of that would, I would think would depend upon the broadband decision.
But did you have a size in mind?
I just looked at at as big as we could fit back there. And I mean, in general, I think we could fit 100 by 200 building back there without too much trouble. And that's about as big as you see normally on the metal span.
And we kind of talked about that, like honestly, if you're gonna build a building back there, you're gonna build it as big as the lot's gonna allow you, regardless of fiber. It's just,
So remind me of the initial plan here. You went back,
So the,
extended this and you tore the Morton building down, right?
yes,
And it was all one.
it was all one big building then,
So you can make this building smaller maybe if you have this other one then.
possibly. I mean,
And not have to tear that other one down.
maybe this is more of a, hey, I know we're gonna need space. I mean, if we move forward with something like this, we maybe don't have to rent as much, or we're gonna rent. I mean, we gotta have some place to go with this stuff. There's just no. We have to have something. It's whether or not we rent something, buy something, or build something.
Are you gonna have enough room though back there for, say you build this building back there and you're gonna house I mean, just congestion and in and out and like, because I saw what was like down there and that stuff was spread out there.
so the.
I don't know, I'm just trying to, do you really have enough footprint back here to put that building in and everybody in and out and all that stuff here? Is that a good idea to have all that stuff here to start with? I guess is my question.
So the thought process was initially when we do the build, you're gonna have to have we don't have enough space. You could take all the trucks out, we still have space for all the fiber stuff, right? We're gonna have to rent a spot. But the amount of inventory that you need once you get construction done goes down dramatically. So the thought is go lease some space, get it up and going, use all the material like you see down there where you're talking about. And then your space requirements that you actually need on site go way, way down. But you're still gonna have a truck at least. You're gonna have equipment that goes along with it. We've got a pole, what is it, $50,000 tension puller out there that's sitting in the weather that's aging every day. We're not using it all the time, but it ages every day. I mean, we got a lot of equipment sitting out right now. And I agree, this isn't for transformers. We wouldn't necessarily, but
I mean, you might have something in there, but a few, I mean, you keep the ones that are long-term and you don't use every day. But yeah, the day-to-day transformers, no, I wouldn't think you put them in there.
Is there much space available in Greensburg to lease or rent?
well, that's what I was gonna talk about. I'm gonna move down to that one too. So the rental space, so one thing we're looking at is like, there's a bunch of space over at the old BCA building. There's a bunch of space, I think that's Fogs across the way here. And then we thought about, and I haven't contacted him yet, but talking to the mayor, so the fire station over here by us is getting ready to move right to their new building. And I don't think they have an appetite to sell that to like just any old business because it's the first place you come into in Greensburg. So I thought about asking and seeing if they wanted to lease some spot there. It'd be perfect for truck in and out and a bunch of material equipment. So there are we came up with some ideas. We just got to contact them and see what the rates are, when it's available, how much space is available, things like that.
So do you have pricing and numbers available for us?
In general, from what I could gather, talking to people, depending on how tall you go, and I mean, it'd be 400,000 or 500,000.
Guess we like pursue getting bids.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just seeing if there's any appetite to move forward before, I mean, I don't wanna,
We don't necessarily need a vote on this. I mean, this is.
I just
Great if
wanted-
you want to, but.
yeah, I mean, I mainly wanted to know, hey, is this something I should pursue or is this a bad idea? I guess that's what I'm.
We'll put together a statement of work, a spec sheet, what we're looking for, and then we'll bid it out. I mean, like we normally would.
So would this change any of we'd done the tour of the building and all that, how many months ago? Will it change any of that stuff that we've been talking about, that we put on hold for this?
It could.
It could, yeah. I mean, there would,
I don't remember.
Back
I know
to
we
Jason's
got-
question. I mean, would we have to get rid of the Morton building that's sitting there to make the back? I mean, it could change all that, yeah. possibly depend, the reason we didn't move forward with the demolish and rebuild the back building was because there's just so
You can't
many.
do that in the middle of fiber.
And you would not want to do that in the middle of the fiber business. We know we need space regardless if you do fiber or not. And so the thought was, is why wouldn't we just build dry space out there? It's, to me, it kind of is a stopgap too, in the fact that
It's
Yeah,
a lot
like
of
10
space
years.
relatively cheap too, comparatively. I mean, compared to what the tear down and the rebuild are in the back, that's a lot of. Is it perfect? No. Is it something that'll have a use for the next 50 years? Yes.
We got trucks right now, you can't get in one bay. I mean, put them out there.
Yeah,
Well,
if any of you guys want to go back and, hey, just to look at the space, I mean, our newer trucks don't fit in the bays.
Haven't we all toured it already?
Yeah,
we did that last. Yeah. I mean, I would not have any concern at all about it being pretty much full immediately. I mean, I mean, Eric's got stuff jammed in everywhere he can in that Morton building as is. I mean,
but then again, the question, we would hope to be up and going on fiber in 6 months. Can you build something like this in 6 months? And the question is, we have no idea, right?
Pushing
So
it.
You'd be pushing it. I don't know. You probably know more than I do about something like that.
Not on a board. I couldn't, I mean, I wouldn't have.
I mean, it'd be, I figured it'd be like a steel structure with the,
Steel box or,
yeah. It wouldn't be,
we just build a field house. You want to build one of those up there?
I want something with doors, maybe 2 windows. And that's about it. I mean, just a concrete floor, metal sides, metal roof, and electric in it for lights. Outside of that, don't insulate it, I mean, maybe have pallet racking along the back wall or the side wall so you can stack stuff up higher, but that's about it.
I'm not going to comment on the cost, but I will comment on the construction process. I think you could build it more quickly than what you believe.
If you're just building a shell building,
That's effectively what it'd be, yeah. That's why I thought, well, I thought we could maybe have something like that in time for fiber if we started quickly. That was the main reason why I wanted to say something today is because, hey, this may be something we could use for fiber. But to Jason's point, I don't know how that would impact driving in and out. I'll be honest, I didn't think about that. That's a very valid point that I didn't think about. I was just thinking, hey, we got all this stuff coming. If we're gonna have it time, I need to ask now.
we haven't spent.
I haven't spent tons and tons of time on this idea. This came from last week when I mean, Jason and Steve pretty much, I talked to him right after I came out of that session pretty well, and it was, hey, this is something we need to think about. So that's where it came from.
I toured what they're doing down there, and I have concerns that you just have enough footprint back here, period, that the building's gonna help you that much, but you are gonna need space. I know that. I've seen that firsthand.
Jason, where are you talking? You toured where down there?
Another co-op that put in fiber. And what they were doing as far as staging the materials and what it looked like and.
Really?
It was
Indiana Co-op or?
Yeah. I don't want to say too much because we're.
It's fine.
Right.
Well, and just from my standpoint, I mean, I see the need. I don't think anybody questions the need, but what Suzanne made, I mean, I'm not at all opposed to exploring and seeing what we come up with. That being said, I think that the broadband decision overall, what I don't believe we want to do is, I don't want to say make a snap decision, but we don't want to make a decision on a structure that's not going to fit into our long-range plans, whether we get broadband or whether we don't get broadband. It needs, whatever we decide, if we decide to do something back there, it needs to be conducive to a broadband in place or no broadband in place. I'm almost inclined to say, let's explore lease options.
Rental.
Let's see what, that makes it variable cost. You're not locked into anything. You haven't painted yourself into a corner. The fire state, I mean, I don't know what's available. But to me, that has a lot of appeal.
I think you have to look at both.
Well, I think you look at that too. Yeah, I'm not discounting that. I just,
And you can do them simultaneously. You can do one or the other at this point.
But if you said if you put this in and then this other project, they had scaled down quite a bit, then maybe I would like to Dale's point, if that's part of the longer term plan, this building gets.
Yeah. What you spend there, you save over here.
yeah.
See that.
I kind of figured, my thought process is we'll use the space no matter what happens with fiber, is kind of how I looked at it.
Eventually.
Yeah. There's a need for space right now from the electrical side to probably use up half the building. So,
So I guess you should probably find out what this is gonna cost and then see what the lease
Right.
availability is and what that would cost. We can't make any decision without that.
right. No, I just wanted to see if it was a hard no more so than,
Let's look and see what options are available.
Especially if you can lease something across the street. I mean, it like.
well, yeah, that's not very far, yeah.
Yeah.
But I just, with the grant thing last month, it's like, and then I know we're gonna have to do something and we're gonna have to do it quickly. So,
Good with that, Matt?
yeah,
Okay. I think you're gonna talk a little bit about the Quebec line of credit too then.
so, one thing that Brett and I did is we talked we do have our stuff lined up with CFC. They had a couple things I needed to update that they said I needed to change the date on one thing and something else is what he told me last, Wednesday. But we talked to CoBank, if fiber goes forward, we probably are, from what everybody says, we're gonna need, additional funding outside of our US and CFC. What we have prepared is we have lined up a $1 million line of credit with CoBank. It's not any, I mean, there is a cost to setting the line of credit up, but if we're not borrowing on it, it's not a huge amount of money. And we have to pay the initial $1,000 to join CoBank, and then we have to pay for the legal thing like we did with CFC to get it approved. But it starts us in the queue of having another source of funding should broadband keep going.
So you made the comment that we couldn't use CFC. What did you say exactly? What's the deal with CFC?
We've got that. I had on my loans that I done, that was one thing I need to change the date on, send them new paper, everything, if that's done, then
This is additional.
this is additional to CFC. CFC stuff is one piece and it'll be approved effectively,
It's not gonna cover the whole thing.
but it'll cover phase one without any trouble.
Yes.
But if we
You're gonna use both.
potentially, yeah. I mean, this is more or less to have a backup plan in place and start lining up additional funding should we need it. If we don't need it, we ain't gonna use it, but if we start the process, we have it sitting there ready to go.
So it's a contingency.
Well, if fiber gets built out everywhere, we're probably gonna need it from what everybody says.
Yeah, I've been asking him, let's put together a financial plan. It's like, Brett, it's hard to put together a financial plan based upon not knowing the scope. And he's right, like, it just depends. Sorry.
Yeah, this is, hey, I'm setting things up to be proactive. I think we'll borrow.
Optimistic.
Yes. Do I think we'll borrow on this in the next 12 months? No. Do I think that, does it hurt for us to have it lined up and ready to go? No. I mean, the cost to set it up is minimal. Well, it'll be $4,000 or so, $3,000 to $4,000 altogether to get the legal stuff done and pay them to join. So, I mean, it's not free. I mean, but it starts the process, I guess.
It's an all-in cost, Matt.
I figure roughly $3,000 to $5,000. is what it'll cost us to get it all set up. And it's $1 million line of credit, and I'm sure that if we set it up and we start down on the fiber plan, if we grow, we can increase this without too much extra work and too much extra money. There's not going to be a massive cost to set this up further. This was kind of, they were willing to give us $1 million just based off the fact that our financials, the way they were unsecured. So I thought that speaks highly of the REMC.
One of the other things I think from a Kobeck standpoint is we've never borrowed from them. So
Yes.
the amount of paperwork that had to be done to get us to the point where we are today, it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and get this line of credit open, even maybe for the, the electric business.
We have another option, don't we?
Well, it's just another option to compare rates against when you need money, whether it's fiber, electric business, whatever need you may
Yeah, I mean, if
have.
their interest rate's lower, we'll borrow from them on short-term money. I mean,
Correct.
I'm agnostic there, whoever's cheapest money.
Yeah, we don't care which lender we use.
It's just another bank in the arsenal effectively.
So you need something from us specific.
I'll need you guys to sign the resolution of the board of directors and you guys to approve me setting this up via resolution.
So essentially you need to make a motion to
Yes.
adopt the resolution, but then there is no funds in the budget.
$3,000 to $4,000.
Up to 5.
$3,000 to $5,000.
It's going to be closer to 4, but.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna be too bad because we spent the money on the legal stuff for the CFT stuff already, so it's not gonna cost us much to set it up. I know it'll be cheaper. I mean, our legal counsel said, hey, this will be way less than the other one because we've done all the work already. So, but I didn't have them give me an exact quote. They just said it's gonna be way less than the other one.
What do we think?
You have to have a decision tonight.
I don't have to have a decision tonight. They would like for us to turn our paperwork in sooner rather than later, but no, I
I'm
mean,
sure they would, because they'd like the 3,000 to 5,000 sooner than later too.
well, they only
It's
get,
not needed at this minute. I mean.
they only get $1,000.
Most of that is all legal.
Most of it's legal. They get $1,000, which is, they are like the farm credit system. You pay $1,000 stock, that's their $1,000 they get up front.
Do we get capital credits with COVID?
We would, yeah. We would get patronage refund. It'd be,
Is there a benefit to action tonight? Is there a detriment to no action tonight?
I don't think it matters.
I don't think it matters one way or another. I mean, in general,
We're not going to need it in the next month.
we're not gonna borrow it the next month, no. I mean,
Put it on the July agenda.
Fine with that.
If there's no benefit,
But we will have it on the.
that,
More answers to broadband, more answers to everything.
and like I said, I didn't move forward with the legal side until, I'll wait on that until you guys approve it. So I haven't spent any money yet on it, so.
Okay. We're good with that. Put it on the July's agenda. All right, thank you. Anything else then?
Just on that rental space piece, I don't know what they approve because I haven't went out yet, but I'll probably need to do that through some type of email. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is let you know I'm looking and having conversations. If any of you know of any other space besides the 3 I said, let me know and we'll look into them. And then I'll probably send out, because there is nothing in the budget for this either. So I'll probably send out some type of email if we come up with some type of lease to do. Although I don't know that.
I don't think there'd be any urgency, but,
Correct.
but if there is, let us know.
It'd be one of those things if it would,
We have to do it.
timing works out to do it right now rather than wait 6 months.
Okay. That's fair. All right, so just let us know if something should come up that you would need response. The next item then is a policy review that we actually started on last month, and I wanted to thank Dale. I think it was the next day, he had thought about a few things, and ultimately that's what was redlined in these two policies. So I hope everybody had a chance to look at that. Like to discuss what's been redlined. Are there additional things we need to think about?
Does it, it says that you're not going to get or meeting stipend. Thought that when we talked about this at one time, we talked about you would forfeit the retainer, but you would still get the meeting stipend.
I think retainer was mentioned. Is that what you
I
meant that? It's like, because they'll still be attending meetings.
Sure.
It would require us to probably change additional policies on that.
That's perfectly fine. I just, to me, there needs to be some sort of incentive or penalty for it.
To make sure.
That was my intent of reducing the writing when I did. So no, that's perfectly fine. That's,
We want to modify that. Greg, can you bring that up by chance? I don't know if you will vote on this tonight.
Yeah.
Change stipend to retainer. The one thing that I don't think we've experienced in some time, we talk about their initial term. And I know there's been a few instances in which something happened to a director. And if I'm not mistaken, we'd have to read on it, I think, a little bit further. I think we would vote on a new director for the next year, but their term may only be a year or two. So do we need to account for that verbiage in here? Because we say initial term.
the initial term could be something different than 3 years.
If they were, that's why, there's a possibility. We've dealt with things that we didn't think we'd ever deal with before, but so should we account for that in here or?
First 2 years.
The first 2 years of their service.
I think where's that at? It's for 1-7B. Oh, you don't have the red line on here.
No, it's like words to change.
That's a lot. Yeah, and the other change that I would suggest that.
This is the new one. This is the cleaned up version.
Yeah, but we don't see the red lines, I guess is what he was saying.
Oh, sorry. Okay, this is before, this is not a certification with IEC. This is an NRECA certification. IEC just happens to host courses. This is not an IEC program.
Is it through IEC, Jason, or
No,
not?
it's NRECA.
But we are trained through
IEC hosts.
hosting.
You don't have to have
You're
like an IEC.
You're right.
So it really should say NRECA
Okay.
within the first.
Their first 2 years
Period.
of their service.
Their service, yeah.
We have the first 2 years instead of their initial term of their service.
Then when you go forfeits his or her retainer, monthly retainer, until the certificate is obtained.
I changed stipends to retainer.
Singular.
Take away the word meeting.
Yeah.
However, does that last sentence, based upon what he said, does it need to be changed though? Because he's considered ineligible to run for reelection as a director. So if their first term was only 1 year because of the dynamics that occurred, then they would be elected or they would have to be voted on again. So
I don't know how you.
They would still have another year because it
You
says
could
5
add-
years.
You could add something that,
They'd still be eligible to be reelected. They'd be after if they still didn't have it by the time they got to another election, then they would be eligible.
So if they were elected for a 1-year term, right? And one year they could not get that certification, right?
It'd be next to impossible, yeah.
They would have to be reelected anyway. Right? So I
Yeah,
think,
but you don't want to prevent, in that circumstance, because it was a 1-year term, you don't want to prevent them from not being eligible to run. So
Yeah, and it doesn't, because you see it, you get 2 years. It says 2 years in it.
So what we just changed, I understand what you're saying, Brian. I think it could be less, the term was less than 2 years or something. Yeah, less than 2 years.
Somebody moves.
What's that?
Somebody were to move in the middle of their term and.
Yeah.
Or
like that happened.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's just, seems messy. I would say remove all that and say, you could say who has not received their CCD certificate in the 2-year time limit is considered ineligible. Right? Wouldn't that make more sense? No, who has not received a hire. Furthermore, any director who has not received their CCD certificate in the 2-year time period is considered ineligible.
in their first 2 years.
Yeah, well, it says at the top too. You're just kind of repeating that, but
Yeah, I think that says it.
yeah.
I would say not the, in their first 2 years of service. THEIR to the left.
I would put an example, even i.e. if a director is appointed to a 1-year term, they're eligible to run. That way it's crystal clear. That's just my opinion.
I'm not, I had planned on going back and looking at the bylaws. I'm not sure we can, do we appoint? In a case, yeah,
no, you don't appoint. It
No,
goes to the next.
it goes to the next year, so
Is that how
that's, yes, that's not gonna,
So I don't need what I'm ready.
well, not appointed, but maybe that'll work.
Did you take out the extension? I mean, ask for an extension? I thought that was something in there that asked for an extension that you had done for someone.
Yeah, I think we did.
Because I had to have an extension with COVID when we went through that, when they converted everything to online, like 2 years and 2 months or something. But I don't know where that was at unless an extension's approved.
Maybe that's another.
The other one?
Also, yeah, I think, or is that what you removed? Tim?
Well, that's what's Xed out here. That's what I'm looking at. I have no problem.
Oh, yeah, we did, yeah, it's on.
You removed that.
My intent was just to kind of close what I perceived as a loophole and put some recourse in it, lack of a better term.
I mean, I'm fine keeping it as you've changed it, Dale, because it is offered over a 2-year period. And I know there's circumstances that are going to come up as well, but I think,
Or if the classes aren't available in that 2 years.
hey, all 5 of them are. Oh, you're saying,
If
Katie?
you're scheduled, because I had to do it like online through that Ohio, which was through the NREC,
Oh,
not through IEC, because it wasn't available.
But when we did this initially, you couldn't do them online. Now there's more options to do it.
yeah.
Just did this policy a long time ago. I mean, I don't know. Matter.
I mean, I would think, and I know we have policies, that we would be an understanding board if there was something that would occur.
I mean, I think the way you have it read today is if someone had something death in the family or something, you couldn't make it, you're just gonna approve a deviation from policy. From the board.
I mean, this can be a working process. We don't have to necessarily vote on it tonight, look at other policies, but I think, I don't know.
Since it was developed with you, Steve, there's just been one instance that's been an issue. There's only been one time that's been an issue.
Yeah, but we didn't implement it until about 5 or 6 years ago. So. But I understand your question, and yes.
I think it's two. Because one never did and one did in a not timely manner.
Okay. Well, maybe unless I was grandfathered, I don't know. So, but I understand your point. I mean, I think we need to have something in place because I think everybody understands the importance of the education piece associated with these. So, and we may not ever have to deal with it again, but that's why we have them. So let's think about it another month or do something with what we have.
I'd leave it for another month. I'm fine with that. It's not that bottom, I just think it needs to be addressed.
It does. You're exactly right. Okay, so we'll leave that one as is and Brett will put this on July's agenda as well. And let's look at the director fees and expenses. I think we were trying to hone in on making certain that what a director attends is that they're compensated accordingly. And so I think that's kind of what we talked through last month. I think
That's what I thought, because there was an issue of, as the chairman directing us to be there, and I think Brett made a comment about, well, there are times when he would like for us to be there to be supportive thereof.
and I think when that occurs, I can have that discussion as well and say, yeah, this is worthy of a compensation.
Did we change D?
We did change D about, that was probably the last time,
So
probably in December.
We fixed that.
Okay.
December.
Fun to make.
Yeah.
That was a long day.
Yeah.
So D is, yeah, I mean, I think we've got D modified. So does anyone see any additional changes to support what we're trying to accomplish? We could go ahead and prove this tonight if everybody's in agreement.
As with going from 8 to 7 board members, it would be in the budget already, basically based on we have a half a year without the stipend, and so it'd be already included in the budget between now and the end of the year, right? I mean, since we have one left, we'd already have the money sitting in the budget. It wouldn't be like we're going over budget on it because we have one less board member for 6 months, and we approved it with the board. You're talking about for any additional, we wouldn't have to do anything with the budget.
Oh, no, you say we would not have to do
Right,
anything.
because we've gone from 8 to 7.
I don't know that this, is a budgetary constraint to begin with. Are we looking at the same thing?
Yeah, she's saying if like maybe you're gonna make us go to a bunch of stuff.
Oh,
So like if we have 5 a month,
that's,
which I won't be attending, but if we did, if Carl goes to like 7 things in 2 weeks, I mean.
I guess since I wrote it, my only question would be, I want to draw attention to the word direction of the chairperson or request of the CEO. Is Is that the correct terminology?
Right, not required, just requested.
Because technically in the hierarchy, I don't think Brett can require us to, the chairman certainly can.
Request.
And that was my, but I wanted to hear what you said and said there are times when you'd like for us to be there.
Yeah, we're talking about doing more and more things and members want access to you. So if we're doing a meeting where we feel like it's a policy or a governance topic, then by all means, we're gonna want, and I think we could spread it to where it's like, I don't think I need all 87.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is the communication between the CEO and the chairman could always be such that the chairman could say this is required.
Absolutely. That's what I could do anyway, right? I would just say, hey, I would.
That's-
Have that.
I think, yeah, I think that,
I think the way it's written, it gives the discretion, it gives some discretion. So.
so if somebody wants to make a motion to approve this one, or we can table it until July as well.
That's what, is the last two statements correct? Is the length?
That's what, isn't that kind of what we had before?
I just want to make sure.
Oh, so this is all, what's on this, okay, deal, but we had discussion about what if a board meeting lasts less than 2 hours? Well, but if you look at A, a director will receive a stipend of $250 for attendance at each regular or, so I think I understand your question, but doesn't it state dollar amount that's received there, the $250? It's regardless of the number of hours for a board meeting. That's my interpretation of this, because I'm not, okay.
That's how I would interpret it.
Because we've had a discussion around that before.
Yeah. So regularly scheduled, special, or even committee meeting of the board of directors would still receive that regardless of time. But again, we as directors have the opportunity to, put a half down, full down, but it has to meet that requirement for the full one. Board meeting, committee, whatever, or greater than 2 hours. So that's good.
Could there be a day? Could there be a day?
Not gonna be today.
What day is it?
Now, one, Dale,
Someday.
you, because do you account for your travel time in that 2 hours?
I don't.
Well, I'm saying, should we?
I don't. It's meeting, to me, it's meeting time.
To you, it is meeting, so
No, it's just the meeting time.
gotcha. Everybody good with that?
I report my travel time, but I do not include my travel time
As part of the,
It's from when you convene the meeting to when we adjourn. That's the way I do it.
okay. Everybody good with that?
If that's the case, I'm gonna move forward.
You're as far as anybody.
Yeah, you're
Further away.
We want to make a motion or defer it till July?
Poor Steve hasn't got to write anything down yet, so maybe we should make a motion.
I'm drawing cartoons over here.
Oh, sure, I'll make a motion.
Okay.
What is this one? Policy 1-08?
Yeah, 1-8.
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. Any additional discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, the same. It's unanimous. Right, so we don't have to worry about that one in July, but we will do 1-7. Okay, affiliated organizations. Brian?
Yeah, we had a meeting on the 30th, but I think we're gonna discuss that in executive session. So.
Okay. We'll do that. Jason?
Who should? We had a regular board meeting in May the 13th. I wasn't at the May meeting here, but I'm just gonna tell you one thing that came out of that, meeting. The EPA's new rules, implementation of the reduction of carbon emissions. They're aggressively going after coal and stringent, emissions on gas-fired generation. So the NRECA has filed on our behalf a challenge against the EPA. 25 states have joined the NRECA in challenging the legislation. Indiana and West Virginia are leading the attorney generals from Indiana and West Virginia are leading the appeal or whatever the process is, the fight. So there'll be more around that. But they're, and it's all about what we were talking about before. Are we gonna be able to meet demand? Are we gonna have enough generation? It's being too restrictive. We also had a finance and audit committee meeting June the 12th. Just for reference, Hoosier, 60% of Hoosier sales are residential. So with the mild weather in 23, it ended up in slightly higher wholesale rates and budget, and 24 so far year to date is 7% lower due to the mild winter. So it negatively have an impact on wholesale rates. However, I told you guys before that Hoosier applied for just shy of $1 billion of new era money from the government. We were invited to submit a second application. Not everyone was invited back to submit a second application. A lot of this is revolving around the Palisades nuclear project. However, the amount that we were able to apply for was reduced to 677 million from 1 billion. What does that mean? If we are awarded the full 100%, that's paid out over 20 years. And that's equal to $4 a megawatt hour reduction in wholesale power costs for 20 years. So it would be a really significant deal. So some good things happening, a couple not so good things happening, but anyway, that's my report for now. We're also working on another little deal that I can't talk about, but would be really good for us.
You'll be able to share when you can.
So things are happening.
As far as the IC board, we have not had a meeting. There is one scheduled Friday. It's kind of the grand opening, if you will. They're gonna have a grand opening event. I know that the employees have been there for a while. I know Brett's been there a couple times for meetings and what have you. So, but that'll take place. We have a regularly scheduled board meeting there as well. So hopefully I'll have more to report next month.
If you go up there for any training or anything, it's a good idea to put it into the GPS because it's roundabout central. And if you're like me, and you're not good at roundabouts, I spent almost 9 minutes, I think it was, to get one blocks. I've got caught. I went around the wrong way.
Kids, Big Ben, look, kids.
Seriously, I've never seen double lane roundabouts.
There. Yeah,
I'm not good at them. I did it again today.
It happens. Anyway, I'll have more next month on that, hopefully. So any additional director training or conferences attended? I know Matt alluded to the CFC. There were several of us in here that went to the CFC. Steve did, Jason did, Brett, Matt, and myself. And, I think it's a great conference to attend. You guys have any takeaways that you'd like to maybe mention? Oh, really? There's something.
I didn't hear him, but I did get to hear Bill Self, I enjoyed listening to him.
Okay.
But it had absolutely nothing to do with, electric.
Right, but most of them tried to make a connection to electric industry. I mean, there were connections made, whether it was a leadership topic or what have you. How about you, Steve? Was there something?
Yeah, I agree with Jason on the Bill Self. Willie Robertson was another good.
Yeah, because I was getting ready, I was like, I'm ready to leave, but then when he started talking, he actually had a pretty good presentation.
Yeah, Yeah, so, can't remember the guy's name, the geopolitical,
Oh, he was,
He was very cool.
yeah, I liked listening to him, just
Oh, yeah.
the world
Well,
politics involved there with everything.
and that was in,
That's his name,
what's that?
Mr. Bremer.
Oh, he was there as well.
Yeah, that was the geopolitical guy, was Mr. Bremer, right?
Oh, that was Mr. Brewer, okay, but the Lippold was the Navy commander?
Yeah.
For, and that was in 2000? Was it before?
It was, yeah, 2000.
Yeah, 2000. And he talked about his leadership and what have you, but, you know, there were 17 Navy.
What was the ship's name?
Oh,
USS Cole.
Yeah, it was
Yep.
attacked in Yemen.
Yeah.
Commanding officer ship.
So, and then on day 3, it was great to listen to those speakers as well, so. It was good. I find it, Brett Baer was there. He does a great impersonation of Trump. Everyone hear that. I'll leave it at that. All right. Anybody else have anything that was attended? No, we good. You guys want to chime in on anything with the CFC?
I mean, for me, CFC After Hours was really good about fiber. I got to meet with 2 or 3 different CEOs, not just from Indiana, that have just currently implemented fiber. I heard loud and clear what Matt was talking about as far as purchasing. 2 things I heard and I've consistently keep hearing is do as much of your purchasing, let the project management and the group lead like inventory control and stuff like that, and what you need. But when it comes to purchasing, you have better leverage.
we can buy stuff better than they can.
That's
Basically
the
what
first
they
thing I
said.
heard. And the second thing was,
But that's where my building idea came from.
Yeah, it did.
It was, hey, we need to do this ourselves.
purchasing, and then something else that we're gonna talk about here in a bit. But you need somebody on your side that's leading the charge. Don't count on just who you hire. They'll have project managers leading the entire project, but you need somebody on your side too. Those are the 2 things I have consistently heard, and I got to sit down and listen. Lessons learned, those were the 2 very common ones.
That'd be something that we'll have to hire.
We're gonna talk about it tonight.
Okay.
Anyone have anything else? Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
There,
I'll second.
we are adjourned. Let's take about a 5-minute break. We'll go into executive session.